Welcome to episode 8 of Chronicles of UK Salafism and Insider Perspective. This particular episode will focus on the year 1997 and what transpired throughout that period. And like I usually do, I want to refer to an event that I think crossed over from 96 to 97. And that was on an occasion when I had completed Umrah and met with some brothers in Jeddah, including Abdullah Lahmami. We were friends and colleagues at that particular time, and I'll explain very shortly the extent to which we were close friends. But during that period, he was working at Dar al Ma'arifah School alongside some other colleagues of mine at the time. And while visiting Jeddah, I remember he asked me to come and sit with him, and we did. And he showed me the first page of a book from Sheikh Uthaymeen, and he read the Arabic introduction. I don't read Arabic and did especially not at that time. And after reading a small excerpt, he proclaimed to me that Sheikh Ibn Uthaymeen was not Salafi, he was Hanbali. And he also referenced Sheikh Ibn Baz saying likewise. This was a surprise from me, and it transpired that he was learning from a Sri Lankan student called Yahya Silmi in regular classes in Jeddah, which other colleagues were attending as well. So this came as a surprise to me, and he would spread this news amongst the Birmingham brothers and others in East London who took up this particular mantle later on. Now, I'll quickly say that I recall at one of the conferences in Birmingham, which I'm going to touch upon slightly later. I remember the Jordanian sheikhs meeting in a house. We were there, but they went into a private room with some of these brothers because this story, this claim, had gathered momentum. And I remember a discussion ensued about this claim. What I know from this, because of our closeness to the Jordanian Mashaykh, when we returned to London, is that they told these individuals who had started spreading this news to desist, to not make such statements. Beyond that, I can't clarify anymore, and it would have to be for others who are actually in that private sitting, if they were truthful, to confirm what the Jordanian sheikhs advised them. Anyway, this was what had come from Abdullah Lahmami, and over the years, when he and I, who are no longer close, have argued and had confrontations, I've requested that he publicly recant this statement. One of the occasions when I asked him to do this is when we had a period of Islah in 2002 with Sheikh Rabee. This was following my second period in Saudi Arabia, which continues up until now. And there was obviously the split between many of the Salafis with the Salafi publications cult. And one Jummah, Sheikh Rabee had invited us, myself, Abdullah Lahmami, who was also accompanied at the time by Abdurazak Sanani, to come and sit with him. And in that sitting after Jummah, before we actually got into the crux of the meeting, I was sitting to the side of Sheikh Rabee in the corner. Abdullah came and sat close by, and I told him, I'm going to raise this with Sheikh Rabee, that you said that Sheikh Ibn Uthaymeen and Sheikh Ibn Baz were not Salafi, they were Hanbali. And he went paler than usual, dropped his head, and said quietly, I was foolish in those days. But as I continued to state, that statement is not sufficient as a recantation or public recantation, because it came from him, upon which others then took that statement and ran with it. Anyway, before moving into further discussion, it's unfortunate that we broke our contact and communication late 2001, because up until that point, despite that outrageous claim against two of the biggest scholars of our era, we maintained contact, so much so that on the eve of 1997, I believe I was an Umrah on that occasion, and I met Abdulillah in Jeddah near his place of work at the time. And he was sitting outside Dunkin' Donuts, and he looked a little upset and concerned. And it was, as I said, it was coming up to 1997, New Year's Eve of 96. And I asked him what was wrong. And he was pensive and said that he needed to get married. He wanted to get married. And because we were relatively close, I immediately took steps to call my wife in London, because we knew of a very good sister who was beginning to practice the deen very strongly. And I asked my wife to arrange for them to possibly connect via their families. So much so that I ended up giving reference taskiya for Abdulillah for the father of this young lady, who the father lived in Jeddah at the time and knew me. And I went and visited him, introduced him to Abdulillah, and basically gave reference for him as a good, upright individual, practicing Muslim. And thankfully, the meetings went well. I had to go and meet the family in Surrey to confirm my testimony for him, and they subsequently married and remain married up until this day. So this was the closeness that some of us had between each other before this cult started causing splits and divisions. The Salafi publications cult, the Abu Khadija cult, as I call them. So I thought it necessary to start this podcast to outline that there were close bonds and friendships, despite some of the frictions that were taking place amongst these relationships. Moving to my learning and instruction during that particular year, Sheikh Ahmed Dahir Awais, Somali Sheikh, had began lessons at Brixton Mosque. Now, Sheikh Ahmed Awais was a student of Sheikh Rabee. This was well known, and even if I fast forwarded to 2002, 2003, sitting in Sheikh Rabee's house, I was there. Other brothers, including Abdulillah Lahmami, we weren't close by that time, as I've mentioned, were there before Sheikh Rabee. And when Abdulillah Lahmami tried to disparage and cause doubt on Sheikh Ahmed Awais for not standing up and speaking openly and criticizing Abul Hassan al Ma'rabi, Sheikh Rabee silenced Abdulillah and stated emphatically, Sheikh Ahmed Awais was a student of mine and he used to teach my children as well. And therefore, be patient. But the Sheikh said, but I'm worried for him if he's not going to make a statement about Abul Hassan. I remember this very, very clearly. Abdullah was there at that occasion as well. Moving on. Sheikh Ahmed Awais began teaching Imam Barbahari Shara Sunnah, and I at present have 23 cassettes remaining from those classes, plus my notes. My notes for 1997 amount to 39 pages, handwritten notes. And I'd like to quote an aspect of the Barbahari lesson because I know that others who were less qualified, especially from Salafi publications, were holding this as some sort of, I'll use the term Bible, okay, and that this was the reference point for everything. And they did not have the qualifications, they did not have the authorization from any scholar to teach this book, let alone having sat with any scholar to teach this book. So the importance of having a reputable student of knowledge or scholar like Sheikh Ahmed Awais teaching was of fundamental significance at that time. So I'd like to go, as I said, to cite some handwritten notes that I took from that class, the first one beginning on the 2nd of May that year. And I'll quote, Ibn Battah mentioned that a drunk layperson who used to attend Barbahari's study circles passed an innovator one day, and the latter exclaimed, "Those Hanbalis." The drunk man returned to him and described the students of Imam Barbahari into three categories. One, those who renounce the world and are engaged in various acts of worship. Two, those who write and acquire knowledge. And three, those who box the ears of those who oppose them, like this innovator. And he apparently struck the innovator as a result of that. I thought it appropriate to refer to this particular narration in my notes because after recent events that have taken place involving myself in an interview um, from an individual who ascribes to the Hanbali madhab and Athari methodology, it doesn't seem to suffice today that an individual says that they are Hanbali without being criticized and disparaged by our Salafi brothers, and not all of them belonging to the cult. So I thought this quote was pertinent because the ascription to the Hanbali methodology of Imam Barbahari was not an issue in this particular occasion. The other lessons that continued with Sheikh Ahmed Awais were on the 16th of May, that was lesson two. Lesson three was conducted on the 29th of May, lesson four, the 13th of June. And I have my notes for lesson five and six, which were merged. I don't have a date for that, but they were a continuation of those notes, previous notes that I've just mentioned. Now, as I usually do in these podcasts, I will refer to local events before moving on to national or international events that year of significance. And a significant event locally was that from the Croydon circles that I had been delivering regularly with other colleagues, I befriended a father of one of the attendees who liked the weekly program that his son had been attending for a few years now. He decided to introduce me to close colleagues who became aware of the work I was doing in Brixton, the activities and the convert composition of that mosque. They owned a very large charity and offered to buy the mosque on terms that were conducive for the community. So as a result, I spoke to one of my colleagues and the solicitors firm that I was working for at the time. And this particular solicitor agreed to act on the mosque's behalf. So the charity then vested the entire process to me by transferring the finances required for the completion of the sale to a bank account that had been established for the mosque by my solicitor. They then left everything to me to decide with no strings attached. Now, after consulting my colleagues, the Shura and management of the community, they remained apprehensive about the sale. And I'm mentioning this because there is something that I think that plagues particular communities, not only Salafi communities, but the Salafi communities are plagued by this, where there is a lack of foresight, there is a lack of business acumen when it comes to making decisions that can progress the dawah, if you like, the movement, the call, or to consolidate institutions where proselytization of the religion, social activities, social religious endeavors can be promoted from a more official and secure standpoint. So this apprehension from them, which continued in many things after that, led us to contact Sheikh Al Albani for advice, and his students conveyed what Sheikh Al Albani said to us, myself specifically, that continue with purchasing the mosque and accepting these donations or these funds from this charity, provided there are no strings attached. And I reiterated there were no strings attached on this occasion. So I continued on my own with the sale. After introducing them to one of the elders, because I wanted to be certain there were elders around me, I introduced them to Sheikh Kamal. After that point, he was not involved in anything, and I continued single-handedly with the solicitor that I had appointed to embark upon liaising and negotiating the sale with the local agents for the council, Nelson Bakewell, they were called. Now, I will move to another milestone in that particular year, and that was the offer of employment abroad for myself. So by mid-October, I had left, which ended up being on a short-term basis, to work in a school called the House of Knowledge, Dar al Ma'rifa, I think it's the Arabic name, private school in Jeddah, Saudi Arabia, where Abdulillah Lahmami had recently worked. Um, I went out with some of my family and my children, and I also met a brother and colleague called Sajjad ibn Abdurrahman, who also taught English in the school. He used to deliver weekly classes for us as expatriate colleagues, and he was proficient in the Arabic language and a very astute and serious individual. He would go on to translate an explanation of Riyadh al-Salihin with a commentary by Shaykh Uthaymin in 1998. Now, referring briefly to my lectures and sermons, on the 1st of June, I travelled to Leeds and delivered a lecture entitled Rap to Reality. This became a popular lecture and was repeated across the UK, often alongside Abdurrahim Green, whose own talk, which was equally popular, or more so, I would say, entitled Sex, Drugs and Rock and Roll, Is There More to Life? And I remember the gathering in Leeds University was actually packed, and the atmosphere was very vibrant. Abdurrahim, myself, and I believe Elias Karmani was the third speaker from Bradford. He'd moved from Tooting, London, where I'm from, to Bradford and was well known in the university. My lecture covered particular topics, including racism, class division, etc., capitalism, stereotyping of black youth, death, prison, the street life, and it was all based around my personal experiences. The only other discourse I have that I delivered in 1997 was on the 5th of September, and that was a sermon in Brixton entitled Death. And this particular sermon referred to the deaths over the previous 2 weeks, but particularly regarding that of two young Muslim boys aged 10 and 13 who had accidentally strangled themselves. Some a tragic incident had gone wrong. The rest of the sermon focused on preoccupation with worldly pursuits and the failure to reflect on the next life. I will refer now to national and international events of major significance during 1997. And that was none other than the death of Diana, Princess of Wales, on the 31st of August. Now, the fatal accident that she and her new partner, Dodi Al Fayed, the son of billionaire and former Harrods owner Mohammed Al Fayed, were involved in, sent shockwaves throughout the world. And across the UK, the US, and other parts of the world, societies went into mourning as media beamed through images of the growing floral tribute and memorial outside Buckingham Palace. People were filmed distraught at this news because she was a favourite amongst the people, should I say, amongst the UK nationals and across the world. Now, it was clear the national grief was palpable, even walking in the streets of Brixton and the silence there and the floral tributes that were scattered outside particular shops and seeing people just walking, crying down the road because of the grief. And this was days after her death on the 31st of August. Now, on that day, some of us were attending, and this would be one of the few occasions, I think it was only one more occasion thereafter, that I was attending Oasis stroke Salafi Publications Emerging Cult Conference. They had a conference, a 2-day conference on that occasion. And the reason I can recall that is because in the evening, some of us stayed up in Birmingham and resided at a colleague's house. There were a number of us stayed overnight. I can't remember the colleague who stayed there, whose house we stayed at, but the news filtered through that Princess Diana had died in a terrible accident that day. And I remember us discussing it. Not much remorse was shown from some individuals, not that it was being mocked or anything, but it was just a news story. Now, I want to describe the atmosphere of that particular conference. On the first day, when we were queuing to go in, it felt more like we were walking into a rave. There were various stalls that you had to pass and almost felt compelled to buy the items in order to get into the venue itself, because the refreshments weren't in there. The program wasn't in there. The merchandise that you would want to get wasn't in there, and there was a one-way route in, and you had to pick up all these accessories, and you were informed as such, before you went in. And it felt very, very uncomfortable. And as far as I'm concerned, from a personal perspective, it's very unwelcoming. In the hall, when we went in, the stage was there, and there was some anticipation. Many were anticipating the conference. There was, on the program, a session with Sheikh Mukbil. And when Sheikh Mukbil was called, the excitement was quite electric, to an extent, that it became deflated, because Sheikh Mukbil then spoke and delivered his lecture, but there was no intermittent translation whatsoever. And then when the lecture had finished, we were informed that the translation would be given the following day. So there was palpable disappointment, on that occasion. There were no other talks of significance, I can't remember, except the emerging cult members giving particular addresses. And one incident I do remember is that an ordinary layperson, I think he was North African, asked a question. Now, not many of us heard what the question was, but those on the stage did. And they wanted the individual to come forward or stand up and highlight his question again. And it was a simple question, but it was one upon which these individuals who were on stage decided to make an example of this unsuspecting questioner, because of the nature of the question that he actually asked. I do remember a very uncomfortable feeling looking at this individual like a lamb to the slaughter, an unwitting lamb to the slaughter, for asking an innocent question. He didn't even seem to be religiously astute or knowledgeable, but yet this is an event that actually took place, and it remains seared in my particular memory anyway. I want to conclude at this point, by what took place at the end of 1997. And my employment in Jeddah, Saudi Arabia, was cut short, due to demands that had been placed upon me from colleagues in the UK. As I'd previously mentioned, sorry, I left for Saudi Arabia mid-October. However, by the end of December, I was compelled to return due to the risk of the mosque purchase collapsing. The original sponsors and my colleagues who had introduced me to them had heard news that had concerned them about the lack of direction and maladministration in the mosque, at that time, during that short period. So some of them traveled to meet me, after they performed Umrah, on one occasion in mid-December, and we met in Makkah, in the hotel, in the Hilton, in Makkah, on a particular Jummah. And it was then that they requested me to return to the UK, because they'd received news from members and colleagues that they knew, saying that things weren't going as well as previously. And I declined. I pointed to in the direction of the Haram and said, I'm here. And Hajj is going to take place in a few months. There's no way I'm returning to the UK at this particular stage. And they tried to encourage me and said, look, just come see what's going to happen. And you can always come back for Hajj another time. I then returned with my wife and kids, to the UK, to have these meetings with the sponsors, who were very, very generous. And I didn't know that it would be the last time I would travel to Saudi Arabia for the next few years. Such was the pressure that was placed on me, and their concerns were confirmed by Nelson Bakewell, the property agents for the local council, the local government, who had contacted me while I was in Saudi Arabia, and they had stated emphatically that they would not continue the process of the sale of the property and the land unless I returned, or placed someone more competent, to conduct the process of purchase. That left me with little choice but to actually stay back in the UK at the time, leaving my furniture, leaving all my possessions that we had acquired and taken to Saudi, in Jeddah. Thankfully, my sister and her husband were on Umrah and we had left the keys to them. So I made a quick call and asked her to bring our clothes and personal effects back, because we wouldn't be returning to Saudi Arabia. Um, I returned. We had to renegotiate the sale over those 3 months, 2 to 3 months. The property prices had risen, and this was reflected in the new asking price, the new sale price for Brixton Mosque and the adjoining land. What I actually did in order to go back and justify this increase in price was I negotiated for the annexation of land at the back of the mosque, which I felt that we could use and utilize in order to justify this sell. The Nelson Bakewell were reluctant at first and wanted to withdraw completely, but I explained to them very politely and tactfully, based on my legal experience, that if they were to completely remove themselves from the sale and not accept my counter offer to annex that particular land, we would just go back down to having difficulties paying the weekly rent, which was £416 at the time, or thereabouts, and they would keep sending the bailiffs, and their bailiffs would be met by a very robust community, as they had been previously, not being able to enter the premises at all. They would then have to institute proceedings against us, and we wouldn't have any funds to pay any arrears in rent, and we would just offer a minimum £1 a month. And that would be for them throwing good money after bad. This I'd learned from my legal experience. And they quickly came back to the table and said, okay, and accepted the terms of the sale, which I will go into slightly more detail in the next episode, because that was a significant achievement for the Salafi movement in the UK, in that Brixton Mosque in 1998 became the first Salafi owned institution, or mosque, if you like, in the UK, and the first convert run Salafi mosque as well. On that, I will end and continue with the next episode very shortly.